And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us. And one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it. And that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. On tonight's episode, we're going to be joined by my guest, Mike. Mike reached out to me recently about coming onto the show to talk a little bit about some of the artifacts that they've been finding down in Mexico and South America areas. Little alien type carvings or whatever they've been digging out of the ground. Some of these buried caves and everything else. So it was definitely something that really piqued my interest. Gives me that old Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider type vibe. So definitely want to get him on here and talk with him a little bit about it. Before we bring him on, though, if you've ever had an experience and you'd like to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, you can go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section, or you can send me an email. That is tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com. Either way will work, so make sure to reach out to me. We'll get something scheduled for a future episode. If you would like to help the podcast out, please continue to share it around wherever you listen to it at. Just make sure to share it. If you're on YouTube, share the videos. You can also help out by leaving a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to Tinfoil Tales at. Just a little click and it helps out with the podcast. You can also become a member of the Patreon. Show your support on there. You can find all that information for that in the show notes. And make sure to check me out on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, X, follow along. We're going to go ahead now and bring Mike on. Really looking forward to talking with him. And I hope you guys enjoy our conversation. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, Mike. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a business owner from Washington State, and I've been interested in theology and different history, things that have happened over the years. It's always been a fascination. I watch the History Channel a lot and stuff like that, and so that what got me into this was a good friend of mine. He collects rocks and minerals as well, and so do I. I've collected crystals. My wife cuts opals, so we were no stranger to the rock and mineral scene and going to the shows. And a good friend of mine went down to Tucson Gem, and he grabbed a couple pieces that were carvings that he wanted to show me. And when he got back, he showed them to me and said that there was an archaeologist that claimed that he dug these out of the ground and that they were 10,000 years old. And I laughed really hard at him. I didn't believe it at all. And I actually bet him money that I could prove it wrong. I thought I could call a couple people and verify real easy that these items were, modern fakes, and so I started on that process, and 5 years later now I've done an extensive amount of research on this topic and met with over 30 different families with about 5 different places in Mexico that they found these pieces and documented these pieces from. Primarily the 2 places that I've researched and wrote books on are Tula Hidalgo and Abuelos de Jalisco. And they're about 6 hours apart from each other. And that was really what started me, is I didn't know that there was, I'd never seen anything like this. First of all, I asked my buddy when he showed me, he's like, who's doing this? This is pretty good work, I said. And I collected carvings and whatnot for years and never seen anything like this. And so, yeah, here we are now. I've got 3 books, and we're prepping to launch our first documentary on the topic. And I still passionately research it. I know that, just like anything with money, like Rolexes or, Louis Vuitton handbags, there's going to be fakes and there's going to be real ones, just like the Nazca mummies. They claim that they were all fake because there was a fake one. But now that I just saw here a couple of days ago that the United States Congress is actually a part of a research group now that is studying these bodies. So it's really interesting to see that unfold kind of in parallel to this with what we're researching, because the beings and the things that we're seeing are very, very similar, if not the same entity type. I guess I don't want to non-humanoid biological specimen, I guess is the proper name for it.
I know there's a very lucrative market when it comes to things like this. And as you kind of mentioned, there are a lot of fakes out there, like replicas and everything else.
Oh yeah.
So it's almost buyer beware sometimes when you get into things like this, because if you don't know what you're looking for, you might be paying a lot of money for something that someone just made in their garage or something. So
Yep, 100%. I've bought in fakes. I know people who have bought in fakes. The great part is owning these pieces and seeing the differences, and over the years you start to make comparisons and see similarities in styles, and hear these lackluster stories that never amount to anything of, oh, we found another cave. That was always what we heard. Oh, we found a cave, or oh, we did this, and never have any pictures. I mean, these things, if I was to pull something like this out of the ground, I would have my camera phone out, like, flashing as many as I could, because I would be so astonished. So the fact that, a lot of these guys didn't have anything to back their claims was really I didn't think it was real, and then I actually made a claim against somebody down there and called him a liar, because he said that he had footage and he refused to show me on a piece that was really important, because we found that there was glass in it, and we didn't really buy that they had glass at this point in time if it's real. And so I call him out on social media, and so he goes and rents a bunch of equipment, some GPRs, geo radars, and goes to where they'd filmed a documentary. And they made a documentary on this from Gen 6 Productions. Steve Quayle produced it about 2 years ago. And it's about 4.5 hours long of just digging and going over some of the finds that they found in these places. But again, it's just holes in the ground. And it wasn't enough to truly make me a believer, knowing that someone could go out there and probably bury that, and then all of a sudden, after I'd called this guy out, they had gotten this equipment, went onto the corn farmer's property, which is a piece of property that butts up right the back of it to the World Heritage Site of Tula Hidalgo, or Tula B, where there's the flat-topped pyramid. They have the Atlantean statues on the top. They're quite famous. You've probably seen them, I would imagine. But this is literally about 1,500 meters that they start doing these scans on the ground on this private property. And they found some anomalies and started digging, and inevitably this is fully documented on our website. You can watch this, them digging in a 14-foot hole, and then all of a sudden this whole wall caves in, and a hole opens up, and it's a cave system that has petroglyphs and things. I mean, this is at the 16-foot dig level. And for me, that was really a point where I stepped back and said, whoa, there's no way that these guys carved out this bedrock and buried this 16 feet in the ground to pull out a few pieces like this. And they pulled out like hundreds of pieces. So the cost to bury this and to do this project would be, I mean, 50 grand, I would guess, at least, or more. It took them 6 months to unbury this. I mean, every day they would bring new pictures and videos. On my social medias, you can follow and see that, we've been posting this. There's hundreds of videos that over the last 5 years of the progress of these. And now they found 3 cave systems total, and just full of the same type of symbology and carvings that we find on these pieces that we questioned for a long time.
do you happen to know offhand, like when they find these things or whatever, where they originated from, like how old they are, and like what tribes or what people they were from?
Yeah. So we've gotten carbon dates. Scott Woltar, he's the host of America Unearthed. He did a lot of the work with Mark Russell, who's an archaeologist. Mark Russell was the archaeologist that talked to my friend down there in Tucson. And those guys did a show back in 2019 where they carbon dated a bunch of these pieces and found dates from 10 to 20,000 years ago. And these were consistently coming up, but it was an adhesive that they were testing, which is the glue that they use to put the inlays and some of the pieces are mosaics, so there's lots of little stones put together, and so that was what they were testing. Well, Scott Woltord had a pipe that had resin in it, and he's like, well, there's got to be organic material in that, and so he sent it off to the lab and waits around for like 6 months. Finally, he contacts the owner of the lab saying, what's up with my test? I've called on this and called on this. And a few days later, the guy calls him back and says, I got your results for you. Don't ever send anything like this to my lab ever again. And yeah, Scott never got renewed for America Unearthed, likely because of this show that he produced with Mark on this. And this topic seems to definitely be covered up. The years, 10 to 20,000 kind of correlates with the younger Dryas second little ice age thing that we went through and can see a lot of die-offs in species, which is an interesting concept in, relation to this and what it's showing. Makes you wonder, As far as the tribes, Olmec and Mayan go back 5,000 years, but I guess that's being pushed now in Peru. There's a pyramid complex where they found some leather, I believe, that was dating around 8,000 years ago. But as far as any tribes, this is 5,000 years before the documented Mayan and much older than the Olmec. And as far as, if you go to like Göbekli Tepe or Karen Tepe in Turkey, you'll find dates that are consistent with this 13,000 years. And it looks like they had a fairly advanced stoneworking civilization because of the pillars and the way the carvings are erected there, which definitely plays into a logic that this could be a reality as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you come about with this? How did you get involved into it? I know you kind of mentioned you've been interested in it, but how did you actually fall into this whole type of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I wanted to prove my buddy wrong because I just thought he was, chasing a fairy tale here. I said if this was real, this would be all over the news. This is the biggest finding since sliced bread. This would have to be on the news, and I just didn't believe it. So I think when I worked with Linda Moulton Howe, when I started working with Scott and talking to some of these peoples, and then they started doing the documentary. That's what really sunk me in is just chasing this truth. I guess it started out with disbelief, and now I just, gosh, I'm almost sold on it. There's parts of it I would definitely bet that there's a truth to this story, and that if they are mass producing these pieces in some ways, it's definitely replicating something that's real, and that's that the petroglyphs are proof of that, in my point. Or the old resin and the bones and stuff like that have been carbon dated as well. We found daggers and certain bones that have been fastened to obsidian for like blades and knives. And those bones have been tested in the same age ranges as the other pieces. We also have pieces that we've tested for age that have the adhesive and that also have ceramic cores. They fastened the mosaic tiles to the ceramics. And so pieces like that are giving us two dates, and some of those are within 100 years of each other.
It's strange. A lot of, just from some of the things I've looked at and which you had sent me or whatever, and I was watching that, it's very interesting. And I've been a big fan of Ancient Aliens ever since that show started, 15 something years ago at this point. And it's always got me interested in the whole aspect to it. But at the same time, it's I don't know how, if we were to believe that ancient civilization made the pyramids, or they made some of these things like the bibliothèque or whatever it is, where some of the things are so precisely cut that we couldn't even do it with modern saws.
Mm-hmm.
How do you wrap your brain around something like that, in the aspect of, if they did this hundreds to thousands of years ago and we can't even do it with the technology that we have today? how do you explain that? And they're like, oh, it just took them a long time. And like science
No,
explains it, but it makes it even more confusing. It sounds more unbelievable in that sense. So it's
yeah,
like, but
especially the pyramids and the foundation work that's underneath of them. That's like just it's mind-boggling, really, how much weight that foundation supports during earthquakes, and somehow it's still there. You know?
they wouldn't have never understood earthquakes, you wouldn't think, and how to calculate for all that, plus how to hold up all the weight, because each one of those megalithic blocks is tons upon tons. Like, so there's so
Yeah.
much weight, not to mention the way it was designed for all the chambers and everything else through there.
Mhm.
How did, I'm not saying it's not possible that humans did it, but it's like that was some very high tech engineering they had going on there.
Yeah. Well, if
But
you look at the story of the Anunnaki in the cuneiform tablets at the British Museum, or in some of like Zachariah Sitchin's work, which I mean is kind of maybe fairy taled in some aspects because of assumptions, but at least based off the right concepts. I mean, some of it's spot on with what you read in the British Museum, but nonetheless, that story and those Anunnaki beings translate into this stuff in Mexico heavily. We find the same symbology, the same beings, as well as the same beings in Egypt. We found, Thoth and Osiris, Horus, Sekhmet. We found Ra. Tons of these depictions. The all-seeing eye is everywhere on these things, and so it's really interesting to see the correlation between Egypt and Sumeria or Mexico. Like the how these all could be connected is bizarre. Other than we have the pyramids in these locations as well. Not so much in the Sumerian area, but they had the ziggurats, and in the tablets and stuff, it talks about those and being like some sort of possibly portals or space ports, and so that type of logic in terms of an advanced civilization at that time does exist in our ancient texts. Even the Bible, if you look at the Old Testament, it's not detailed very heavily, but there's definitely a tale of some sort of uprising that was extinguished based on the flood stories, and that translates to Gilgamesh as well in the epic there.
I feel like there's always a flood story throughout
Hmm.
different civilizations. There's always talk of a different type of scenario. And to look at it not from a religious aspect, from like more of a scientific aspect, if you think that the world, the ice age or whatever was ending and the waters were melted, like the polar caps or whatever, they were melting, so the waters were rising. I wonder if some of those flood stories were not from something to do with that, like
Yeah,
the waters coming up from that, because it would had to have been a global flood. And
yeah.
that's the only thing I could think about is like
Or comet
irrational.
fragments.
Yeah,
There's the story, and these pieces from Abuelos depict a solar system, and there's an extra planet in there being hit often. I mean, it depicts Jupiter with the lines, it depicts Saturn with the rings, and all the correct numbers from each other and in order. And what's interesting is that they show this planet. Well, in the Anunnaki tablets, there it talks about this planet Tiamat, which was destroyed by Marduk, and he was the son of Enki. So it's really an interesting thing to see, that possibly this planet could have been destroyed, and that could be why we have our moon and some of the um, irrationally placed things like Mars, for instance, has this massive scar on the surface. I mean, that's evidence in itself that this planet came into contact with something pretty significant at some point, and the atmosphere is very bizarre and how things happened there. So that could very well be a reaction of that too. Same with Venus and the completely gassed out atmosphere. So something obviously happened, and so that could be what caused this, and it would correlate with the Anunnaki texts, and these pieces definitely correlate with those as well.
I think like for me, when it comes to the story of the Anunnaki and everything else, to me it sounds more plausible than basic evolution. And I know that might
Yeah,
it might
no, I
make
agree.
some people roll their eyes or anything like that, but at the same time it's like if you look at us in the grand scheme of evolution. We've only been here a microscopic amount of time. And look how much we've evolved in such a small amount of time compared to everything else. It's
Yep.
almost as if we were manufactured to be this way.
And
Because,
we inherit this earth.
yes, like to
Like
me,
we're the apex somehow, but we haven't been forever. Like there's been lots of dinosaurs and all these other species that we see in the fossil record. Same with other the different species of Homo erectus and the Neanderthals and all these different things that have evolved. What's interesting with the pieces that we're finding is we see the DNA strand pretty commonly. There's actually a symbol in Egypt that's the same looking strand of DNA almost, and we see them with weird like surgery type scenes. Anubis and Thoth standing over these beds with alien looking beings, sometimes with different animals and head. Like it's almost as if they were manufacturing, like you said, or doing this to do this genetic manipulation, and we're kind of the product and result. Like if you were to have a farm and you were to plant a bunch of seeds and you found the one fruit that was the juiciest and the sweetest, so you take her and you take her seeds and get rid of all the other ones and give her the land. Well, that might be why we inherit the earth.
hmm I know
In
some
a
people think
farm
that
way.
we are just one of these I don't want to say seed factories or whatever, but like they think that we've been engineered for this planet. They think these other beings go to other planets too and do the same thing. Like we're just all part
Mhm.
of this mass. I don't know what the proper term would be, but like they're going around and like manufacturing different civilizations based off from their own selves. And we
Yeah,
just we just so happen to be the one here for Earth.
yeah, yeah, and this whole thing I think comes up in the Anunnaki town. It's where they manufactured the Adamu, they called it, and it took the gal 750 years to get the genetics stabilized. And so it's interesting to see that maybe that was in some of these religious texts. It says that there was a uprising of things that weren't good, and then we came along, and that was like the divine intervention of saving us maybe from ourselves. And so that might be we maybe were created as slave species like it says in the Anunnaki tablets, but there may have actually been some sort of divine intervention that gave us freedom in terms of at least not being stuck in the mines all the time. Like there's some governing, and what's interesting with that is how the king's list works in Sumeria. You have this 250,000-year-old king's list with all these kings that reigned over for all these years, and then all of a sudden it stops. Well, why did it stop? Maybe that was the divine intervention. I mean, some people think it's Jesus or whoever you believe in. I'm not going to try to get religious here, but nonetheless, this intervention of change, it seems to have occurred. And 250,000 years ago is when we see the Y chromosome mutate, and that mutation has been ran in terms of the odds of it happening again. And this is the one that gave us all of our intelligence and changed the size of our head. All these things happened in relation to this Y chromosome mutation. And so the chances of it happening again were like triple impossible odds, 5 to the 500th or whatever it is. I don't know what the number is, but it was a ridiculous number. So it's when you see the genetic manipulation on these pieces, it would make, like you say, a lot of sense that story is rather than random evolution of these crazy odd things.
It just to me scientifically like evolution to explain us just doesn't seem. I feel like we've evolved way too fast compared to everything else.
Yeah, yeah. Our DNA is changing and rapidly migrating faster than any other species on the planet.
Yeah, and just the
How?
I like our intelligence from being able to. We're literally having a conversation across the country here, thousands of miles apart,
Hmm.
and we've just evolved that technology within the last, say, 100 years. We've been able to do stuff like this. Just
Yeah.
think from like we are able to travel through into space now. We can go to the moon, where we can like all these other things that we supposedly can do. It's just crazy to think because if you look at every other type of species on this planet, they're nothing like us.
Yeah. Yeah, the DNA is super similar in many cases. Even the pig and the rat are very close to our DNA, more so than even I believe even a lot of monkeys, which is kind of crazy. You think we look mostly like these guys. Why wouldn't our DNA be as close to the chimp as it is to these others? And so it's interesting. At the minimum, we definitely don't understand half of it.
That's why we use fetal pigs in school when we had to do like dissections or whatever, because they were so close with
Yeah.
humans.
Yep.
So I've always thought that was funny too, that everyone says we've evolved from primates and the great apes or whatever, but yet the pig is very similar to us.
Yeah.
So it's strange.
Yeah, it is. What's interesting too with these pieces that we're seeing is, you've got all these UFOs and they do cattle mutilations and abductions, and this is a common story across the map for a long time. I mean, for decades, if not hundreds of years. I can't. I'm not sure exactly how far back it goes, but I know into the 70s. Um, Gosh, so you see on these pieces a lot of the stuff that you would see in the Sumeria and in Egypt, where they worship the cow and the cow with the special headpiece on, and that sort of thing. But we also see some of the pieces where um, there's like literally like tractor beams coming down from the ships to cows, and so we wonder if this race or this being may be closely related to the cow, kind of like we're closely related to the pig in terms of are they harvesting the genetics or something of that nature. But it seems as if they had knowledge of this when they made these pieces, which is blows my mind.
Now, something like that to me, were cows native to the area or were they something that were like brought over? Because that would be something
Yeah,
that you'd have to really think about because if the cows weren't native to here, how are they making carvings of cow?
yeah, no, and I would imagine, yeah, it's a good point, but I'm pretty positive that they are. I mean, I know the ox is native to Mexico for
Hmm.
sure. I mean, I can put that as a proof, and that's very very similar to a cow, um, at least. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with it or but I know like I don't remember if horses were native to like North America or if they were only brought over here.
That
Eh,
I don't think they were. Yeah, I'm pretty
yeah,
sure they were brought over. Yeah.
yeah. Because out west you have wild horses and everything, like the stallions out running around, but
Yep.
they were never. I think they were just brought over here
Just
when they,
loose.
yeah, they got loose and they bred and they went off on their own. I know we
Yep.
had bison, which
Oh yeah.
they've almost become extinct because of overhunting and everything else in the early 1900s, 1800s, and
Yep.
1900s. But
Yep.
no, that was just something I was thinking about when you mentioned that. I was like, I wonder if there was already cattle here prior to that, because otherwise it would be
Yeah.
it'd be one of those things where I'd kind of be hesitant about. I don't know
I've
when
done this with every gemstone that we found. I've made sure, and I've got a gemologist that I work with, and so we go through all these gems and microscope them and try to dissect where they came from and the mines that possibly produced it, and with the bandings and the different saturations and all these different things you can kind of do that as a deter, and we haven't found anything out of consistent outside of stuff from South America, like the Guatemalan stuff, jade and things. So there's definitely trade routes between, but we also see the pyramids all the way through South America. So it's likely that they had different settlements or things if they were the pyramid builders.
that's the other thing I've always liked to talk about is it's strange that you have thousands of miles separating oceans separating, yet there was pyramids in Egypt, there's pyramids in South America, I think there's pyramids in China.
Yeah.
These ancient civilizations were all building pyramids. How did they
Hmm.
learn and why were they like if they're spread out there, there's no communication and no knowledge or whatever. It's weird that they all evolved to build the same type of things.
Yeah. Communication is a really big one. I think that we have wireless communication and all this wireless things. There's pieces that we found that show depictions of pyramids with beams coming out the point at the top. We found numerous pyramids with intricate carvings of all kinds of different things, similar to the Ben stones found in Egypt, with the same double winged, or the double. I think it's the double winged with the sun disk and whatnot. Um, so it's and the other thing too that you mentioned, how there's this separation. That was actually one of the things, the fact that those pyramids kind of align similarly to Orion's belt, that you see there, in the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico, and then the Great Pyramid there in Egypt, or the complex there. But those three pyramids sit in that same type of formation, which I mean, could be an accident. Some people, like, I think I heard Flint Dribble say that it was because that those were the brightest stars in the sky at the time, or something of that nature. But still, to align your large pyramids to that, especially if they are claiming that they're tombs, what for what? That's an extensive amount of survey and work that had to go in to construct that like that, let alone in the middle of the desert or the jungle.
Yeah, there's
No one would want to tackle that project today, I'll tell you that.
no. That's the one thing I've always grown up as a kid. I always wanted to be. We mentioned earlier, like Indiana Jones. I want to be an archaeologist. I wanted to go out there and
Mm-hmm.
find all these things and do all these crazy things. But like, literally, my exploration is out here on a computer at the moment, so
Yeah,
I don't get to live out
I'm a
the
couch
adventure.
archaeologist.
Yeah, I don't get to live out that adventure, but I've always been fascinated by it. So it's when you reached out to me, I was like, yeah, I definitely want to talk about stuff like this, because this has always been one of my fascinations. Even as a kid, like I've just always been fascinated with this type of stuff.
Same, no, very much so. And I especially with Egypt, we'd go to the bookstores when I was 4 and 5 years old, and my mom would say, "Oh, what kind of books?" You take me over to the kids section, and I would ask for Egypt books. Like, I want to see the symbols, I want to see the artifacts. Like, that's what I wanted to see when I was a little kid. I was so fascinated by it. So to be in this position now, completely left field. I mean, my businesses have nothing to do with this at all. My family and friends, I thank them dearly for sticking with me, because this is such a left turn. But it's kind of a blessing too, because people know me, and I've established what people understand. So when I come to them with something like this, it's definitely not what they would expect from me.
Right. Yeah. For me, I've always been the weird person in my families and friends or whatever. So that's what I do now is not really outside the realm of abnormal for me. But it's
Yeah, and I just never bought into it, I guess. I just
mhm.
never bought into aliens and that type of thing. So for me to chase this like this, it definitely was out of the norm.
Yeah.
But
It's
yeah, I'm used to it. You got to have thick skin if you want to do something different, and that's something with music. And I'm a musician. I play the synthesizer. So I realized quickly with the synthesizer that this was not a very, at the time, it wasn't a very popular instrument. Now it's actually, it is really popular, but at the time, so you got to chase your dreams and go with what you feel. And I think a lot of people maybe don't do that because they're afraid of that.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you said you've written a couple books. Would you like to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
them?
yeah, absolutely. So we've documented two different places primarily, which is Tula Hidalgo and Abuelos de Jalisco. And so I wrote a book for each place. It categorizes their full size 8.5 by 11 hardbacks, full of pictures. I'm a professional photographer, and so I did all the photography work of these, macro shots, 60 megapixel, the best quality I could possibly give with the best glass. And I really wanted to show these pieces for what they were. And so we've cataloged and wrote up quite a bit of information. We published our carbon dates in some of the books, as well as the petroglyphs and the digs and all of that sort of thing. And so, yeah, the first two books there are Abuelos and Tula. And then I wrote a third book called Anunnaki, the Alien Atlantis Mesoamerican Connection. And it wasn't at first when we'd seen some Egyptian themed pieces, but we really didn't know what to make of it. And then we started to see a lot of the Anunnaki stuff coming out of Tula, and things that even resembled like Greek mythology, Poseidon and Zeus type of thing. I mean, a very, very interesting things to be seeing expressed in a much different way than what we see the Greeks or the Romans to express it, but still the same story with the same type of logic. And so I really wanted to paint that connection, because as you go all over the world here, you find this type of connection, and you find it, in Hawaii with the Tiki, or the Dogon people in Africa, so it's really an interesting thing to see that this may have been a global spanning species, or group of entities, whatever they are. I don't know if it's even a physical entity at this point, or if they're light beings. It's hard to say, because the pieces, sometimes it shows them with legs, sometimes it shows them with like angel wings, other times it shows them with no body. They have like a serpent, like they're a snake or a serpent, or an eel in the water, and then a lot of aquatic depictions as well, with gills, and like I said, the tridents and stuff that you would see for Poseidon, or talks of Atlantis. So I definitely find these connections very, very heavily in this area, and Plato might be right.
I wondered, even like with ancient Egypt, they had a lot of different depictions of animal-headed humanoids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You had your Anubises, you had I forget what the one with the bird-looking head was called. But yeah, and when you go back into like the Sumerian stuff, a lot of their depictions, I don't know if they had like the animal heads, but they had a lot of like the really tall, bearded, winged depictions too.
They did have the mixtures and the talk of it a lot too, of scorpions with human heads, and all kinds of different things. Like Ishtar had 6 or something scorpions that guarded her gate, and they had the heads of man, and they had the cow with the wings and the man head. Yeah, so it's common, but you also see that in Native America as well, with like the Lakota tribe and different tribes. You hear about the eagle-headed man, or the eagle-headed man that walked around, and then you hear about the feathered serpent in Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, and down in South America. And a feathered serpent, well, you got to really ask yourself what that means. And when we see these pieces, as I was just explaining, some of them have angel-looking wings and a serpent tail. And so feathered serpent, could this be related to that as well? And we see a lot of depictions of Quetzalcoatl on these pieces as well. So we think it's definitely a same storyline.
I've seen stuff about that, linking it to being a dragon.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if dragons were a real thing or not. I'm not even sure that a lot of things I talk about on the show are real or not. But
I'll give you one to chew on that.
I was say,
oh yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say, like, but it's always something that's always been interesting. I was like, I'd like to think there were dragons. It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, well, they very well could be. To start, I'll say that they found a corpse, or a fossilized remains of an entire dragon over in China. And this was last year, I believe. If you Google it, you'll find it. It's absolutely breathtaking to see. I didn't hear it on the news, but it's a verified dig. So that being said, if you look at the catechus, the symbol there for alchemy and pharmacy that's everywhere, it's got the staff with the 2 serpents going up it and the 2 wings at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that symbol might very well be the 2 sons of God in Genesis it talks about. And they talk about the sons of God coming and having their way with the woman of man. And so we believe that there's a possibility that those sons of God are actually the sons of the primordial dragon. And if you go into the story of Michael and Satan, Michael pushes the red dragon, Satan, from heaven with God's permission. Well, in the Anunnaki beliefs, the primordial dragon is the creator of all. And so you hear primordial dragon there, and then you go to like the Hebrew language and look up what the Adam Kadmon, and that's the primordial man. And so it's interesting. They call Jesus the Adam Kadmon because he's the primordial man. So is it because he was the son of a primordial dragon and embed his soul into a man, and then died, and then that's a fixed genetic together when he ascended, and that's what the Adam Kadmon is, or what they refer to as the Adam Kadmon. And so it's really interesting to see that trickle down through, and how much influence, like Moses, how the serpents fight, over him, and same with the Garden of Eden, and the fact they call it a garden, going back to my earlier metaphor there with finding the good seeds, but that the fact they call it a garden is very interesting too, that they would use that to call it for humans,
I think I've mentioned it on my episode, just the one before this one. I've mentioned it a few other times, but if you listen or read into the Bible, God punished the serpent by taking away, making him crawl on his belly or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So if you listen to that, it almost makes it sound as if they were able to walk. And if they were of this, I almost go back to the whole alien concept again, because it's like almost sounds like a reptilian. The depiction almost sounds like a reptilian influencing Eve to eat the apple and everything else. But there's also other things in there, like Eve is not necessarily Adam's first wife. Like there was Lilith, and like there's just you start going down that rabbit hole when it comes to like the Bible. There's so much things that you can pick apart to where you can relate it to other aspects, to other things, but
it's endless.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of stories, and the imagination too, and thinking about things like, I often wonder if we just know the truth, like if man was given the truth at his inception, what that would have done, and would we even care, and would we take for granted all of this truth? And I guarantee our conversation wouldn't be happening right now, and we wouldn't enjoy watching Ancient Aliens, and you know what I mean? So this great mystery, they talk about it in the Pistis Sophia, as well as like the Lakota tribe. They have this thing called the Great Mystery. And what's interesting with the Lakota is they have the white buffalo calf woman, and this is also something that spans to the Mayan as well. And this could very well be the Isis, figure or divine womb that speaks of in many ancient texts that gave birth to all these species on this planet. And you got to ask yourself, like, we have 3 trillion or some crazy number of species, including the plants and insects, etc. Why don't we see any new ones being born? Mm-hmm. That was always something that I'd ask my science, like, where's the new species at? Like, is there a place to see that happen? And it never happens. No one's ever witnessed it. And that's kind of bizarre when we have so many. How does that work? And the logic is in the Pistis Sophia, it says that they took the Sophia away, and that's how they stopped the fallen from succeeding as they did in the beginning. So likely the fallen abused this womb or this genetic manipulation. And then once the divine womb was taken away, they couldn't create any new species on this planet. And that's likely why we're in this stalemate of species that we're in. Or I shouldn't say likely, but if the stories are true, then that would be, I guess, likely. Yeah.
I've never thought about the fact that there's not new species, because you always hear about them discovering species.
But there's fossil records of them.
Yeah. You don't ever think about the fact that they're not new. They're new to us, but they're not a brand new species.
Right.
So no, I never actually.
Yeah, just weird odds to not have new, with that many, especially in the plant world and stuff. And what's crazy is we have all these geneticists that do, genetic, I guess you could call it genetic manipulation with CRISPR, with plant grafting and genetic splicing and all this different stuff that we do. But you don't ever create a new species.
Yeah.
That's
I know
weird.
that. Yeah. I know that they've, what was that back in the 90s? They cloned a sheep. I don't know if they've been cloning.
Yeah.
They've never publicly talked about cloning anything else, but I've wondered if they've never tried to clone something else that's already been extinct. I know there's talk about like with the mammoth or something.
Yeah. Yeah, people are heavily invested. I know people who have invested in this project that's supposed to do that by, I think it's 2027 or something like that.
I said I watched something before about it, but I don't know. I feel like if they're talking about it publicly, they probably already done it behind closed doors. So,
Yeah, yeah,
but
exactly. And yeah, I agree.
but if they're doing stuff like that, to me, it's almost like playing God. So
Mhm.
at some point, if without going down that whole religious rabbit hole, but if back in the old biblical times, if God punished them for some of the things they were doing then, I'm waiting for the punishment to come back if that was all true, because
Yeah.
I feel like what the world does nowadays seems to be a little bit worse than what they're doing back in the old days.
Punishment's a really interesting thing in the Bible, and I take this very seriously because I researched these people called the Cathar, and they were very, very Christian toting people that believed in Jesus and the saving and all this stuff. Yet in I think it was like the 11 to the 1300s, they were completely eradicated, man, woman, and child. No, no one was spared. They were all burned at the stake for being heretics because they believed that there was two gods in the Bible, not just one, but the God of the Old Testament was evil. And the God in the New Testament was actually the real God. And so the God in the Old Testament was actually Satan after the fall. And he was pushed and fell into his own universe. So he wanted to dethrone God and take over, but he wasn't there. So God gave him essentially his own universe by allowing that push to occur. And so that's why it's a fallen universe or a fallen all these things, and why in the beginning he says, well, let there be light. That was him asking for the light to come into this dark universe that he had fell into, but was actually the devil speaking, and he claimed to be God. That's why Zeus is the god of gods, likely, and he fell from the sky. He probably was Satan, is what we're thinking is a possibility, based on all these stories and the consistencies of the Enki Enlil eagle versus the serpent debacle that all these cultures have been in. You see all these serpent temples and flags that have the eagle on there. There's deep roots to that.
If you notice in the Old Testament compared to the New Testament, and I've mentioned this before too, God was very like ruthless in the Old Testament. Like
Very different.
he was not a loving God. He was a very much I'll wipe you all out type of God. Like
Yeah.
don't screw around. And then in the New
And
Testament, oh, he gives you his son, and like it's he's now one lovey and everything else. Like there's a complete like 180 from the very vengeful God, the jealous God, to be honest, of the
yeah.
Old Testament to the New Testament. So it is almost like they're completely different.
That's why I think the Cathar people might actually be right. The Cathar people believed in the book of Enoch and a lot of Enochian teachings. And that book of Enoch is really important. It's not part of the canonical Bible, but it's absolutely something that's mentioned all over in the canonical Bible, which is, I think, a relatively important factor to its importance and its reality of being true, and or at least a real book. And I think they don't accept it because they don't know who the author is. But nonetheless, that those people, if they were right, the whole reason that these pieces might be kept a secret could be that war that has been going on spiritually for thousands of years that they talk about, and that might be why those Cathar people were wiped out. Just because of they didn't agree with the history that was being narrated. It wasn't the truth; it was being narrated, and that's why we find so many things that we just don't have the trust in our own history at this point because it's being rewritten or mangled. You look at like the Native Americans and stuff and what they did just in the 1890s. They took in there's a sacred dance that the Lakota tribe would do called the Sun Dance, and they made it a federally illegal thing to perform. You could not do this. And back then it wasn't just you're gonna go to jail for the weekend. It was a
Yeah.
serious thing that your tribe was violating and would be probably put to death. I mean, I'm not going to say that for sure, but back then it was a different story with the whole thing with reservations and how they were segregating and doing all this. But the fact that the United States federal government had enough knowledge to know that fasting and that this sacred dance needed to be stopped for whatever purpose, that there's obviously more to the story than what they're letting us believe. Because what would be their reasoning? It's a dance, you know?
Yeah, that's very strange that they'd be that concerned about a dance.
Yeah. And this is on Wikipedia. I've researched this. Like, it's just the Lakota tribe is really interesting. I've fallen down another rabbit hole with Native American history. And if you look at religions like Mormonism, for instance, they believe that that Jesus came to the Americas at one point, which is hard to buy in terms, but unless maybe this whole story is connected, and that's what they're talking about. We've even conceptualized that it's possible that Anki and Quetzalcoatl was a previous version of Jesus, because in the Bible it says Jesus descended down from heaven. Well, what was his name before? Was he always Jesus up there, or did he take the name Jesus when he was born as a human? And that's what we have to ask, is who was he before? And the Jehovah's Witness believe that he was Michael before. And if that's the case, then it could be that Michael is actually Enki. And that's why the two sons of God, Enki and Enlil, are the serpents that are crawling up that staff of the catechist, trying to manipulate Moses and control humans or whatever,
Yeah, it's a lot to think about when you go down that rabbit hole. Like it,
Yeah.
I try not
I
to
never
get
thought
too.
I'd do this. Yeah.
Yeah, I try not to go down that pathway too much, but it is one of those things that I kind of think about here and there, just because there is so much out there. And then if you start looking at things and you start putting things together, like it almost sounds plausible. Like it makes more
Yeah.
sense than what the cover story is.
I gave
So,
up on all of it. I spent 25 plus 30 years of where I was agnostic. I didn't have a belief. I didn't know what to believe. And I didn't believe in any of it. Aliens, all that stuff. I didn't, just couldn't justify it, and yeah, it's really, it's something that I just can't even believe I'm sitting here talking to you about that type of stuff. I never thought I would be someone to discuss that.
mhm. Yeah. Well, if there's anything else you'd like to talk about with comes to your like the upcoming documentary and anything else, we can do that now, and then we can probably wrap this one up because we've been going on for about an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as the documentary, on September 11th on our YouTube channel at Alien Carvings, we'll have our documentary. It's free for everybody. The families down there allowed us to get uncensored dig videos and to publish all of this with all the petroglyphs, the tunnels, how they do things, different digs out up on the hillside, just to show how this stuff's being found, and yeah, go from there. But yeah, stay tuned to our YouTube channel, or subscribe or whatnot.
I'll make sure to
That's about it.
include a link in the show notes for anyone out there. That way they can just go to it, because I'm looking at my release schedule and you said September 11th. That would actually be right around the time this comes out. So,
Oh, cool.
yeah.
Right on. Good deal.
So it should kind of work itself out around the same time frame. So if you're listening to this episode now, it's probably getting ready to come out or it just came out. So make sure to go to the Alien Carvings YouTube channel and watch it. Well,
Okay.
Mike, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, you as well. Have a
Definitely
great rest of your night.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. If you ever come across anything more interesting again or anything like that, just make sure to reach out to me and I'll make sure to have you back on here.
I appreciate it. I will do.
All right. Well, you have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that's the show, everyone. I really hope you guys enjoyed the conversations. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to the contact section of tinfoiltales.com. Just get your message to me. We'll get something scheduled for a future episode. And just remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.
Tinfoil Tales in the headphones. Yeah, it's time to rock. Got a story about a cryptic creature. Let's take a walk. Bigfoot, dogman, they're out there in the dark. But the truth is out there like an alien spark. UFO sightings got the whole world shook. Conspiracies unfold like a story in a book. Media control, trying to keep us blind. But I won't be fooled, gonna use my whole mind. In history, they don't want us to know the secrets they hide, the truth they won't show. Dominate our society, they keep us in chains. But I'm standing tall, it's time to break the reins. Control, trying to keep us blind. But I won't be fooled, gonna use my own mind. In history, they don't want us to know